everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of the Hump Day Hiatus, your weekly pause from all things diet culture. I'm here today with the wonderful and amazing Salem Debs. She is the owner and director of Community of Hearts Yoga, which is located super close to the St. Jacobs Market here in Kitchener-Waterloo. She is also a mother. She's a singer-songwriter. She's a social justice activist and really working hard to raise awareness around inclusivity and diversity. So, welcome, Salem.
Thank you for having me.
So happy that you get to be here with us today.
Ew, excited.
Yeah, so we are we're going with a theme here on the Hump Day Hiatus, just to kind of keep a little bit of a focus, but you know, things are going to be pretty casual and laid back in terms of conversation. And I'm drawing each theme from a body trust practice, which is kind of what my training is in. So all about returning to the wisdom of the body and listening and honoring the sensations, cues, and the knowledge that we've gained from our lived experience. So we'll start off, if you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself and why you're passionate about the work that you do and what you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you. So like Dana said, I'm Salem and I'm a teacher of yoga. So I teach yoga and meditation, and I'm very, very passionate about inclusivity and diversity. And what I find that completely connects to what we're talking about today, which is body inclusivity and, you know, moving away from this diet culture and I guess moving away from what is considered the norm. So a lot of the work that I do is hoping to change or broaden people's lens in a way to start looking at the world and looking at their surroundings and what they're doing from a much more broader perspective that's not just monolithic, which oftentimes can be that way in terms of, you know, yoga magazines, yoga culture, yoga Instagram, just the people that you see online, the people that you see front and center that are promoting the product. So it's been really something that I've been passionate about just based on seeing the lack of diversity, the lack of inclusivity, the very monolithic kind of body type that you see constantly. And so that just becomes that's become a very big passionate of mine.
Yeah, that's awesome. I find that, you know, you kind of hit the nail right on the head there. I've been there's been a very large disconnect between myself. I also am a yoga teacher, and how yoga is packaged and sold for the most part here in the Western world. And yeah, I've really struggled with making space for it in my life, knowing, you know, wondering like, am I supporting these norms and, you know, the quite ableist I find, and white and thin, you know, heteronormative narratives.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I love what you're doing.
Yeah, so this is why I think we connect in that way and having these conversations, because anyone that's interested in having a more diverse conversation and a conversation that's not just like, you know, textbook, I guess, experience, I think it's important for us to start to kind of broaden our awareness and start to have these more, maybe even more challenging conversations, so that we can reframe and change from the, you know, the roots of all of these experiences and these industries that we're in.
Yeah, and I had I loved when I was in your class last. You know, the focus and the emphasis that you put on allowing folks in the room to honor their bodies and really allow the movements that they were making to be informed first and
Mm-hmm.
foremost by what was happening for them in that moment, that particular day. Instead of it really being, I don't even know how to articulate it, but I found myself in other classes where, the movement's being prescribed, and this is what you do, this is how you do it, there's a correct way to do it. And I just find that to be exceptionally alienating, I guess. So I really loved how you led the class. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, how you came to that style of teaching.
I think how I came to that style of teaching is from my own experience. I mean, I'm fortunate enough, first of all, to be taught and trained by Asia Nelson of Prana Life Yoga, who is very, very specific about that type of teaching, for sure. Like, she tries to hone in and cultivate that awareness to say, like, I don't know your body and I can't tell you how to move your body. I can only give you some guidance, and I can help to encourage you to interact and to find what feels right in your body, to learn what it is that, learn what it is that you need today, and to kind of give you the tools to be able to build that experience within yourself. And I think that's how I move in my body anyways. I'm a creator, I'm like a dancer, a singer, a writer, a poet. And so to me, it's like, for someone to be like, do it this way and only do it that way, just feels so rigid. And it takes out any opportunity for creativity, it takes out any opportunity for spontaneity or from looking inward. And to me, yoga was the first movement practice that like allowed me to feel safe and strong in my body. It was like the first time where I didn't feel like I was worried about how people looked at me or if I had the ability or not. I was fortunate enough to have some teachers at the beginning who allowed me to just explore and had that kind of languaging around it. So it felt like the first physical practice. I mean, I tried to work out growing up. I tried like to do all kinds of other physical practices, and I always felt like I just didn't feel like I was enough, or I wasn't, you know, performing as well as I should be. And so my hope is that everyone in my classes can feel safe, can feel like they can be completely themselves, that they're not being judged, they're not having to perform for me or anybody else in the class. So I try my best to really make sure that we set that intention. That is your practice, and I'm just here to guide with a couple of tools.
Yeah, that is so important. And there have been so few spaces that I've been in that really kind of lead with that out of the gates, because I find um, my introduction to yoga was very much as you described as well. Like, I had a lot of privilege with who I started working with, and as time went on, I kind of started to venture a little bit away from that, as I wanted to explore other types of yoga and other movements. And I really, really quickly found myself in spaces where there was, there was a clear kind of competitive energy about it. And so even though, the idea and the spirit is that it's your practice, it was very much all about, how much you could do, how you looked while doing it, what body you walked into the classroom with. And I know quite a few individuals as well who don't feel welcome and don't feel comfortable going into yoga spaces because of this kind of, normative that has been created around it.
Totally. And when you hear languaging, it's so hard to believe, but I've heard it many times languaging like, get your best beach body or excuse me, look good naked and all kinds of, languaging around getting better abs and like, having that swimsuit body. It's a challenge for someone like myself who I've always had this kind of really not a very healthy relationship to my body growing up. And it's only in the last couple of years that I've been able to kind of reframe that and reestablish a new relationship. That's so hard to hear because you're like, I'm not going to walk into, the studio with booty shorts and a small top. Like that's not going to happen because, growing up, I was like self-conscious about all of my humps and lumps and my different, my curves, if you may. And it's not until the last couple of years of like reframing that, really looking at that, coming face to face with all of my, all of my traumas, I guess, around my body, that I was able to reestablish a new relationship and like totally be like, never a diet again, number one. Like I love all food. Like I have such a new relationship to food now. I have such a new relationship to my body. And it's constantly, I mean, it's not like I'm healed, it's like a constant being like, okay, there it is. Let's look at that and like and like let's replace that with new languaging. Let's recognize that that's some archaic stuff. Recognize that when I go to Ethiopia, when I go back home, like to where my family's from, people are like, oh, you look so healthy, you look so, and here people might be like, oh, you might want to lose a little bit of weight, your bum is getting a little bit bigger, or it's this kind of exaggerated perspective here where it's like, oh, you have kind of a Black woman's body in terms of having a bigger bum or being curvaceous. So it's like getting outside of all of that, those narratives that just don't serve me and that are just stereotypical, and asking like, how do I feel in my body? Like, how do I actually feel? Do I feel tired? Do I feel fatigued? Do I feel strong? Do I feel well? Do I feel, what am I feeling? Am I feeling anxious? Like that matters more to me, like my emotions and like then like how my my organs feel, how my heart feels. And that's to me my new relationship with yoga. I can't say that everybody has that experience, but for me, I'm like so aware of my breath and so aware. I feel like I can feel my like organs and I know what's happening and I can feel the revitalization that I feel after a class. And it's like I tone out all of the other languaging now. It's been a long process though.
Yeah. So it sounds a little bit like for you, yoga has become this place of deep connection with your body, with your life and everything that's flowing through you.
Yeah, it's so many layers. Like fundamentally, it's like first the physical layer of being like, you can't, like in yoga, they call that the koshas. So there's the physical layer of like recognizing your physical form. You can't deny it, but it's a different conversation. It's not like, do I have cellulite? Are people looking at my butt? Like, how do I look in this? My love hand. It's not that conversation anymore. It's like, wow, like my tricep muscles are getting stronger. I can feel them now. Oh, wow. Like I feel like I can lift myself up more, without hurting my lower back. Like I feel that my fingers feel stronger now because I've done these certain movements that are, I don't feel like I have to crack my fingers as much anymore. Like things like that, my toes, my feet, my glutes, I feel like are just becoming stronger, like things like that now are the conversation in terms of physical. And then there's these other layers. There's like these emotional layers of like, how am I feeling right now emotionally and mentally? And then eventually I think it becomes this like deeper layer of, for me, a spiritual experience of just going inward and letting go of all of these narratives that are constantly, you're being told to act a certain way, to be a certain way in the world, to subscribe to a certain philosophy. And for me, it's like listening to that intuition again, like getting beyond all of the stuff, the shite, so that you can be like, what do I really want? How do I really feel? And what do I need to heal? No problem. Let's work on that healing then.
Yeah. I find that, the way that we approach, and not just yoga, but the way that movement in itself is approached in our culture at the moment is, it's very much about the aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I learned through body trust work and my own healing is that, if we really are looking, if we're looking to care for ourselves in deep and meaningful ways, we need to put the aesthetic, the weight loss, that piece of things on hold. We need to put it on the back burner, because if we're constantly, looking at the results,
Mm-hmm.
right, then we're always going to have our communication and that listening with our body interrupted.
Totally.
Because a lot of, the things that we're taught we're supposed to strive for with movement, requires that we completely override our own inner wisdom, the sensations that are happening in our body. It's like, I can remember so many times, if you experience pain, if you're super tired, if you're really fatigued, like, you just keep going. That's a sign. That's weakness leaving the body, is what someone said once. And I was just like, I'm pretty sure that's not the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And it's just, we're constantly being told by experts and, whoever else decides they have an opinion on these things at the moment, that, there's a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious for you, if there's anything that you can share with our listeners, and I'm totally putting you on the spot right now, about, how they could maybe start to arrive at a place of listening to some of that inner wisdom. Is there anything that you do or have done in the past that has helped you to arrive at that place of being open to hearing that?
For sure. I think for me, meditation has been a big part of that. I think when we take like a movement, when we take out the distractions, because sometimes even yoga practice can be like a distraction, like a way for us to like not sit with ourselves long enough to be aware of what's coming up. I'm not really into like spiritual bypassing or like emotional bypassing, where we're like, okay, just get through it, just like move through it. Like, you're courageous. So I think that we need to really sit with ourselves long enough alone, have some quietness. And for me, that's what's helped me, having that time to meditate, that time to just be in those in those emotions, has served me, because it's helped me to see like how I've treated myself. Sometimes you look at how the world is making you feel, but you're like, I'm not being very kind to myself. And I need to reestablish that relationship so that that inner voice and myself are like whole, like we're in union. We're not like in conflict. I really believe that it starts there, and it's just like finding that quiet time. And as a mother, especially, it's like, you got to say, like, I have to take that oxygen mask first. I got to receive it. I got to do this for myself, and know that as you heal yourself, then you can offer that out into your family, your friends, your partner. But it's like, I think it starts with yourself. And that's what my experience has been. It's been like just sitting, allowing myself to feel the emotions, anger, sadness, crying. And then sometimes just feeling like, I really like myself. Like, this is really, like, sometimes you're like, you love on yourself and you feel good. And you're like, wow, like, this is where I need to be. This is the kind of mindset that I want to stay in. But I think it takes you going back there again and again and re-establishing and like building that relationship. It sounds corny, but it's like really building that relationship to yourself so that when you do walk out into the world and you walk into these spaces, it's like, no, 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 no. That's not for me. No, thank you. Thanks for offering, but I'm not subscribing to that anymore.
Yeah, I often have a conversation with clients and folks about how our self-care really, for me, and this is kind of just echoing what you said, but it's the greatest act is relating to yourself with kindness and compassion, right? And just being able to hold that space for yourself and um, you know, separate yourself out from the tape that plays in your head, from the critic, from those voices, and really, like you said, start to look at where all this is coming from, start to do some healing, and yeah, just have that kindness and that compassion. And if whatever you're doing, has its roots and its foundation in that place, then what you put out right, is already charged.
Yeah, 100%.
With that.
And you got to own it. Like sometimes what I'll do is I remember I went through a phase where I was like not looking at my body. And then there was a point where I was like, I'm going to own all of this. Like I need to look at my body and all the things, the lines, the scars, the lumps, like all the things, and like just own it so that there isn't this like aversion to it. Oftentimes that aversion of being like, that's not mine, I don't want to look at it. You kind of start to kind of create your own reality in your mind of what you want to look like or what you hope to look like, as opposed to being like, this is who I am. Like, wow, like look how I'm majestic. This body does this for me every day. It just like works and provides and like does all these magical things inside that I don't understand that it does to keep me alive. I don't know. There's a part of me that like, I know Oprah talks a lot about that. It's like just honoring that the mechanism and the majesty and the magic in it, it just doesn't even make sense that every part of your body is like trying to keep you alive every single day.
Yeah.
And then oftentimes it just gets, distorted and resorts to this like, oh, look at your butt, look at your belly, look at your what? Like, what about this this incredible magic that's happening every day? And sometimes I'll just do that. I'll just sit and I'll be like, wow, cells, organs, all the things that are working to keep me alive. To kind of move out of that like little me feeling and move into this like, I'm part of something much more dynamic, much more greater.
Yeah, there was that was also something that was hugely instrumental for me, as I was looking to heal my relationship with my body as well, was looking at myself. And I think for a lot of folks, talking about loving their body or even accepting their body can be just can feel very out of reach.
Of course.
And so I definitely, started at a place of respect, which is kind of what I'm hearing in what you're articulating, is that, this body and how it functions is miraculous. Right. And so even if there may be things that we're working on, accepting, we're working towards loving, that it's a process. And if we can start by just honoring and respecting all the crazy, amazing, wonderful things that we can do, can definitely be an access point to starting some healing. There was a friend of mine, I'm just looking for it right now. She posted there's an article that she did, and I absolutely loved this quote from it. It was, oh, sorry, just bear with me for 1 second here. I'm finding. Hopefully I can find it. Maybe not. But it was basically talking about the articles by Anna Sweeney, who is a dietitian. She does a lot of eating disorder recovery work. And she was talking about having MS and how she absolutely, totally loves high heel shoes, and how even after her body had started to change and she wasn't able to wear them anymore, she would still go and go shoe shopping, and she would buy shoes, and she had this collection of shoes, and she talks about how there's so much energy that we put into wishing that things were different with our bodies than they were. And, how if we were able to take that time and put it into grieving and healing, what a difference that would make.
100%. I think there's so much of, it's incredible now when I look at the relationship that I have to my body. I mean, it's constantly a work in progress, but when I look back at what it was, it's so, and how hard it was to be in that space. I totally get what you're saying when you say acceptance. It's like getting to that point of acceptance and being like, okay, this is what it is. This is my body. And like, where can I go from here? Like, how can I progress from here? And just remembering being like 9 or 10 years old. And I look at the pictures and I remember seeing, I think my leg was like the size of my forearm, and I had these like unbelievable expectations. And I looked at my body and I thought that I was fat then. And that was kind of like and that was the words that I used to use, call yourself, you're fat, and wanted your body to constantly look different. And it's so, that narrative is so, it's given to us from like magazines and like from TV and from media and from like all the women, if we're talking firstly, or, what identified women that we see constantly in our media. And I encourage people to like move out of looking at what you see as mainstream media. Like, get out of that, like that maelstrom, and see if you can find more. There's more, body inclusive, more diverse, people that look different than what you might see on the magazine in so many different like shows. Like, oftentimes I'd be like, I'm not even gonna watch that because that's just like promoting the same nonsense. And I'm tired of seeing the same people that look exactly the same and talk the same. And thank goodness there is some change that's happening. We are starting to find there's so many more resources out there where you can be like, you know what? I'm going to do like a media cleanse for the next 21 days. I'm going to search out people and things and topics that are not the status quo. And all of a sudden your world just opens up. You're like, holy moly, there's so much more information out there that doesn't have to look like the status quo, that informs and kind of encourages you to be yourself and reminds you that there's like, billions of people on this earth that don't look like that and feel great in their bodies as well.
Yeah, I often will, send people to my social media feed on Instagram to take a look at who I follow and take a look at, who those other folks are following, because there is so much out there. And if you can kind of curate and tailor the media that you are taking in on a daily basis in a way that will allow you to kind of widen your lens and expand your horizons and your perspectives on what, life looks like. If you can see others' experiences and, it doesn't mean you have to understand them or you have to know every detail about them, but just even seeing others' experiences and knowing that they're out there can really help to, to kind of get us out of, I feel like, we end up in these, I don't know, I can't think of the proper term for them, but, we're like in these tunnels where everything just is like, sounding back to us. And it's really, I find it more and more difficult, especially with algorithms and all that stuff, to actually find new information.
Yeah.
Right. And so by kind of poking your head out there and seeing what others are doing can be really, really helpful.
But you can see it, like oftentimes I'll look at my YouTube stuff that just like automatically pops up. And oftentimes I'll sometimes someone will leave their computer open and I'll see at the studio and I'll see their algorithms that are coming up and I'm like, wow, that's drastically different. Like we're definitely looking at different things. And it's pretty polarizing, actually. So it's why it's so key in a time where we're fed for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and right before bed, like media frenzy, like information, tips, how to dress, how to talk, how to build your business, who to be in this world, how to be a philanthropist. Like it's pretty overwhelming, and it's like we got to step back and decide. It's like seeking out what we want to receive daily so that it's not just like this, they're just not just like throwing at this information at you and questioning it too. Like I'm constantly questioning, I'm like, why is that? Like I don't want to look at that. So I'm going to make sure that I take that out of my feed or block it, and being proactive
all the time.
Yeah.
I'm like, thanks Instagram, this is inappropriate, this is offensive.
Yeah, we got it. And I've called things out and said things to people in a kind and respectful way, but just gently said to people like, hey, I don't know if you're aware, but this is kind of like depicting or appropriating or insinuating certain things, so that we become more aware, more conscious in what we're taking in through our media, so that we can feel more free to create our own lives based on our own inner awareness. Yeah. And I think, I know we were talking earlier about, you said that you love nature, and before this talk, but it's like, I think that's what nature does. It's it neutralizes you. And sometimes we just need to neutralize. And I think that's what meditation is supposed to do as well. It's supposed to get you out of these paradigms and out of these scripts of how you're supposed to be, to allow yourself to start to challenge, like, do I actually believe that? Like, is that actually how I feel? And start to feel neutral again, so that you can build from a place of neutrality.
Yeah, and meditation can look and be so many different things. I think everybody has their own way, and I find for me, stillness is not a way for me at the moment.
Yeah.
And I find my days to be quite full and busy, and so for me, it's while I'm making my breakfast in the morning, I simply notice the movements that I'm making. I notice how it feels in my hands, to grab the pan that I'm putting on the stove, and, the temperature of the fridge when I'm reaching in for the butter. I made a cheese sandwich this morning. So the temperature of the fridge when I'm reaching for the butter, and just really kind of bringing myself back to my body, and back to, really in the moment that I'm in. It's about being in the moment you're in, and living it instead of, you know, all these other places that we go in our minds and throughout our day.
Yeah, and when you talk about food, it's like that when, you know, I love what you're doing in terms of being like, we need to get out of the diet languaging and like that needs to end because I speak to so many friends and family that are like, you know, all down, like starting these like new diets or starting these new like routines with like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym, going to the personal trainer. And it becomes this like big momentum to kind of create this change in their bodies and their minds. But really, it's just like, I feel like it's like almost like a constant again and again kind of trauma because they go through these experiences. They're so hard on themselves. They restrict carbs. And I'm like, oh my gosh, when is that going to stop? This conversation about restricting carbs
Yeah.
as if carbs are like the bad thing. Like this is, you know, there's so much research and science that states that that's not the case. It's like, for sure, refined sugars and all these things that are processed and unhealthy that are not real. Yes, 100%. But it's like, these are foods, like that's a very privileged conversation to have. These conversations of like limiting food source. And of course, we also, the other side of that spectrum is the, you know, maybe the indulging in food for sure. But it's like, there are two very extreme spectrums that I think we live in our society here in North America. It's like either we're like not eating, we're like totally, you know, we're vegan, for sure there's sensitivities, or it's like we're, you know, there's a level of very serious indulging because of globalization and because of the fast food that's so available to us today and Sobeys and all these stores. However, it's like, holy moly, like food, to honor food, the ability to be able to eat, you know, from like knowing my family who came from like a, you know, developing country and knowing their relationship to food and knowing how it's like, it's connected to like love and like connection and togetherness and family. And it seems to be that it's now about, you know, dieting and weight loss and, you know, about, kind of like a class. There's a class now that comes to mind. I find in our cultures and our societies with like, well, if you eat these kinds of foods, then you're like better in a way. And I think it's like we need to really look at that and evaluate like what am I subscribing to, and how have I lost my connection to food, like the beauty
Yeah,
of food.
totally. And I find even especially in a lot of the work that I'm doing, I find orthorexia to be pretty prominent, and using, you know, binaries when it comes to food um, is can be really damaging. And like you said, you know, quite a privileged thing to do. You know, the way that we've structured the cost of food here in North America, you know, is that depending on your socioeconomic status, you know, you might not be able to buy the quote unquote healthy foods. And I think that, you know, food is better than no food.
Okay.
And, you know, a lot of this language and the rhetoric and the restricting and the labeling um, is only doing harm and taking people further and further away from trusting their bodies and, you know, allowing that relationship to be as it will be instead of trying to control it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When we look at total health outcomes, the research shows us that you know, 25% of our total health outcomes can be linked to our personal health behaviors. So, like what we eat, how we move. The rest is 75% is kind of, you know, up to circumstances that are beyond our control. So there's our socioeconomic status, There's our gender identity, our sexual orientation, our race, our access to food, our access to healthcare, all these things influence our health so much more than what we're taught about personal responsibility. And I think that if no, I'm not. I'm going to retract that. I'm not going to say it. But yeah, I think that there's so much blame and shame that we have developed around food and how we feed ourselves, how we care for ourselves because of this virtue that's been put on it, and how we feel somehow more worthy if we have more willpower or restraint. And there's pleasure. What about pleasure?
Hello, I eat my cheesecake when I want to eat my cheesecake.
Yeah, like what about pleasure? What about moving for pleasure, and eating for pleasure and satisfaction? And, for me, that, reconnecting with pleasure and my desires has been something that has been so healing.
Right?
So healing. And I find that there's so much fear around that. And I often find myself thinking, about the stress that causes and the toll that has on our relationships with others, ourselves, and how that all shakes out and what the impact of that is compared to the impact of like just eating your cheesecake whenever you want. What is the stress about not having the cheesecake?
And also, I think we could literally learn from other cultures. Like, I think the Western world, we've created this very, so many things. We've created a lot of really unhealthy things. And when I look at other cultures, I think about movement being if I look in my culture, there's a lot of movement where we move our shoulders. Some people move their hips a lot. Some people might consider this very sensual or sexual, but it's pleasure. It's fun. It's it feels good in your body. And I'll go to classes sometimes and I see a teacher being okay, now move your hips to the side and then rotate it up. And then I'm are you trying to teach salsa? Because I feel I feel that I can do that in my body. It feels very natural for me.
Yeah.
And it's we're trying to teach people to get in touch with creativity and sensuality and pleasure in the body. And the same thing goes for food. In the Ethiopian culture, my culture, we eat with our hands. We eat with our hands. You feed each other while you eat. There's this whole kind of beautiful experience, I think, that we have when we eat together. There's just a full experience to it. And it's there's bread there's meat, and some of the most healthiest people that I've met, when I say healthy in terms of they just feel good in their bodies, are eating all things, eating, and not to say that you can't have restrictions. It's just I think we just need to awaken to the possibilities, or awaken to what restrictions our culture has created for us, and we've kind of subscribed to it. And sometimes just look at how they eat in Italy. Look at how cheese and bread and wine is just a normal part of culture and part of pleasure in an afternoon to spend with people, or the way that people will drink coffee. I feel it's the energy behind it, the way in which you do it, that matters more than what you're eating or what you're doing in your body. It's fine, do a yoga practice, but if you're angry and doing it and trying to get all these moves in, and you're oh my God, and you're at the end of it, you have a headache, you're drained and tired, you need to nap. Or if you're doing some type of movement, whatever it is, but it feels fluid, it feels good, you feel rejuvenated after. And if you're eating the cheesecake, I know Eckhart Tolle talks about that. He's eat the fries, but eat the fries with a sense of mindfulness.
Yeah.
Eat it with a sense of honor and regard. And I think it just transforms the way that we move in the world. from my perspective.
Yeah, it's like letting yourself have what you have.
Yeah, totally. When it's there, right?
Yeah.
Instead of fighting yourself while you're having it, you're like,
Yeah.
I want this cheesecake, but I'm angry with myself. There's way too much happening in our bodies energetically, cortisol just like pumping through because we're stressed about what we're doing as opposed to enjoying it. Yeah.
Well, that feels like a nice place to take a little pause.
Mhm.
And if there's anything else that you'd like to share before we sign off for the day.
Just thank you for all the work that you're doing. It's so wonderful. I still will never forget being in that room when you were teaching the YTT and you were talking, we had to all imagine and close our eyes and imagine what it would feel like, to be, what you might say is a heavier person or a fat person, and how everybody's emotions, like that exercise brought so much out of people, and it made me realize in that moment how much work, like how much we need this, how much we need what you're doing, and how it's going to really affect a lot of people to really start real, honest, truthful conversations and get to the root of this.
Yeah, and really look at our biases that we have about bodies because, I find at the end of the day, especially for myself and all the privilege that, I hold in the body that I'm in, we all have our internalized weight shame and body shame, right? And at the end of the day, I can leave my house and I can walk out in the world and I do not get treated any differently because of how I show up, right? There are so many folks in the world that are living in bodies that are marginalized that don't have the privilege, right, to be able to walk through the world un, unoppressed. And I think that, with that exercise, it was my hope that, we could really start to look at our biases and the way that we see people, the way that we judge. And once you get to that place, you can then begin the healing, right? But you got to know where you're at and meet yourself where you're at in order to take those next steps. And I think that's really what it's about, is recognizing where we are and learning together how we can do less harm and we can move forward from a more kind and compassionate space to make the world a safer place for everyone.
Amazing. Exactly.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
For those listening, if you are interested in more information, you can find Salem Community of Hearts Yoga, Instagram and Facebook. Also, her website as well is
communityofheartsyoga.com.
communityofheartsyoga.com. Perfect. Tons and tons of classes on the docket, so head on over and check it out. Thanks so much for joining us, Salem.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.